Drafting a Stealing Bananas listener league in the fun Guillotine Leagues format where every week somebody is eliminated and all their players hit the waiver wire. That's what we're doing on this special edition of Stealing Bananas on the Stealing Signals airwaves. Let's go. Welcome in, everybody. Shawn Siegele, Stealing Bananas co-host. How you doing? The draft has already started, Shawn. I'm going to pull up this draft board. We're going to talk through this format as we go a little bit. It's a unique format. Among other things, it's an 18-man draft. We are, or 18-person draft. We are at pick 9 here. We have 17 Stealing Bananas listeners along with us. The reason there is 18 is every week we'll lose one person from the league. And like I said in the intro, all of their team will be available on the waiver wire. And so we will be bidding throughout the year. You know, free agent budget management is really important. We'll be bidding throughout the year on key players. One of these first round picks will be available after week 1 as that team is chopped. And we're going to do this all throughout the year. We're going to try to make it and outlast everyone. But 17 weeks, 17 teams will be chopped. One of these 18 teams will be left at the end. It's a super fun way to play. I always love the idea that if your team's not bad, you don't owe the league any like, oh, I got to keep setting lineups. You know, people like to play in the home leagues. You got to keep setting your lineups. You got to keep trying. You're just done. You lose. It's kind of it's like, all right, well, I have to keep paying attention if my team's good, but only in those scenarios. Shawn, before I get some of your thoughts on the format, we are already up here at the 109. We got 4 running backs in the first 8 picks. Jonathan Taylor jumped up there. 4 receivers, Lamb, Hill, Jefferson, Amon-Ra. What direction would you like to go here? I mean, I assume it's going to be a wide receiver pick. We got Jamar Chase. We got Garrett Wilson. What do you think?
I mean, it's Garrett Wilson for the win in 2024, right? Everything is Garrett Wilson.
Always Garrett Wilson or bust. How are you doing? What are some of your so we got an opportunity to do a Guillotine League together in 2022. We did not last year fit that in. I missed it. I thought it was really fun in 22. We went really far. I think we were one of the last 5 or so teams and really enjoyed the strategy of it. There's a lot of different ways you can play this, and it's still kind of a newer format. So, you know, I've been reading a little bit about Paul Charchian is the guy who founded this and recently Fantasy Life acquired it. And he has some articles up over on Fantasy Life talking through strategy. And some of his strategies are about, you know, saving your fab because it goes farther later in the year. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Our team was more of a 0 RB team where we spent a lot of fab early. And I think we went out and got Austin Eckler. He was the first round pick who got chopped after week 1. And this was 2022. He had a rough week 1, but he went on to lead the NFL in touchdowns. And so once we built a 0 RB team and dropped in the eventual league leader in touchdowns into it, I mean, spending early paid off. We were then very, very strong until late. And we still had, I mean, we kind of backed off and had some money to play with late. Eventually, you get down to the last 4 or 5 teams. It's all super teams. We thought we were in great position to win it. You have a little bit of a down week. That happens. Towards the end, it all just, you know, comes down to, can you just keep putting up monster weeks, right? Your team is fantastic, which is a fun element of it for sure. But yeah, my point is there's multiple paths, right? The founder of it loves the idea of saving your fab. I read some of his articles. It was talking about how it's kind of a mistake to be spending early. I thought that was fascinating in response to our strategy, which a couple years ago, and there's always going to be healthy debate on these things, but that's what makes it fun. But a couple years ago was to spend, and that worked for us with our imbalanced draft and then addressing that imbalance after week 1. So yeah, I mean, there's still just a tip of the iceberg here. There's a lot of things that we can do with a format like this.
Yeah, you read a fantastic piece on it for Stealing Signals. I really enjoyed reading that. I'll have something up on RotoViz, looking at this draft, thinking through how I like to play it. But I mean, so much of that, again, is informed by that league that we did. It was the 2 of us and our producer, Colin Kelly, who's my co-host on OT. so much fun doing it with the both of you. That was a charity league. Those, in addition, have additional benefit there. This league with the 18 teams, and one of the things that Fantasy Life is going to be doing with this that's so awesome is that you mentioned the chop element. Your team isn't good, you're going to be out, but they're going to be starting leagues throughout the early part of the season. So I think it's very compelling to get a look at week 1, to get a look at week 2, then do the draft and work through some of those elements. But yeah, like you said, I mean, guillotine leagues are fun because eliminator formats are fun. But then on top of that, the guillotine leagues, there's no better free agent experience in all of fantasy football than a guillotine league where a first round pick, a second round pick, a third round pick, obviously the logic extends all the way through. Those players will be available to bid on after week 1. And I really like the way that you described it, because if you add some serious juice to your team early, then not only do you get the value of that player for longer, but you have created a type of floor at that point where, can you still have all of your guys hit a really bad week and get knocked out? You can, but you also are probably in this situation now where you're going to make it deep. So there's this balance between maybe a floor strategy where you get down to the end with the final 3-4 teams and you are trailing in terms of fab money and that therefore leverage to be able to make the key pickups at the very end and win the whole thing, versus making sure that you're in the mix, where one of the things that we like to talk about is that you need to build your draft strategy around, whether it's a dynasty league, a home league, a high stakes league. You want to get as many buys as you can, and you want to be in the playoffs as often as you can, because once you're in the playoffs, almost anything can happen. That's true of this format as well.
That's right. And so we should also mention the format does not include kickers and defenses. It's a quarterback, 2 running back, 2 receiver, 1 tight end, 2 flex league, 8 starting lineup spots. You only get 14 picks, 14 rounds, in part because there's an 18-person draft. And then, once the cuts get made and we make ads, it starts to become difficult to roster everybody that you want to roster on a 14-man roster. 8-person starting lineups, 2 flexes, like I said. It's the same as FFPC without the kicker and defense element, other than it is not tight end premium. And yet the tight ends are still very important. Shawn, 3 go here in the early part of the second round. We also still have Cooper Kupp available as a high-end wide receiver we both really like. What are you thinking here?
Yeah, well, this would be, this is a very clean spot for our Dalton Kincaid pick. The flip side is that maybe if you get one of the elite tight ends cut after week 1, that player might be a little bit easier to acquire than the big stars at running back or wide receiver. One of the things we were able to do previously is acquire pretty good tight ends
10 seconds
inexpensively. So for me, Kincaid, Kupp. Yeah, let's go Kupp.
I thought you were leaning that way. I would have been fine either way. I'm doing a couple reader leagues with stealing signals readers as well, and took Kincaid in the second round of one of the, actually, excuse me, that wasn't a readers league. I started a home league with my college buddies. I took Kincaid in the second round of that already. Excuse me, I got Kincaid in the third in that one. So anyway, I agree with you that the Kincaid,
because your college buddies were like, Ben doesn't know what he's talking about on Dalton Kincaid.
Right. Yeah, I guess so. I got the 111, started Gibbs, Debo, and then got Kincaid back at 311. So we'll see what happens at tight end. The stealing bananas listeners far less likely to just let tight ends fall. I do think it's an interesting discussion. You were talking about this idea of whether, what can you fill from who gets cut, right? So how do you build in some floor to your roster is the first element. And I think a lot of receivers is great. You just an 8-person starting lineup, and you can start 2 receivers and 2 flexes. 4 of them could be receivers, and it's an 18-man league. So by the end of the fourth round, there's a lot of picks that have gone off. If you get yourself 4 good receivers to start, that's fantastic, right? Like it's going to give you a nice stable floor. We know that there's a lot of value storing, with a lot of value store in using your early draft capital at the receiver position. We know there's talent there. We know these guys are going to be good to a certain degree. Their scoring can be a little bit more volatile, a little more up and down. And yet they're probably not going to, be catastrophically bad, the elites, when you get in there. And so we get Garrett Wilson, Cooper Kupp. We think there's going to be plenty of targets there early on, right? That helps you with the early season floor. And yet, as you were talking about, what can you address on through the chop? And as I wrote my strategy out article at Stealing Signals, what I was thinking through was, in an 18-team league, you got to give up something. And I think what you got to give up is quarterback. I think you want to play this as a late round quarterback format. There's a lot of quarterbacks we like late because you can only roster 14 people. Most teams shouldn't take 2 quarterbacks. And then after week 1, you're going to have a starting quarterback chopped. And then by week 5 or 6, you're going to be down to a 12-man league. And you're talking about way more available quarterbacks. By mid-season, the quarterback position shouldn't have a whole lot of stress on it. And so that was the onesie position for me that it really makes sense to push. Tight end, there's only so many elite tight ends. And there will be, I think, stress on tight end, even into the later stages. Eventually, everyone should have a really strong tight end. But it will maintain its scarcity further into the season as you think through the way that the league shrinks.
Exactly. So if we time out on Jared Goff today, that will qualify as a good pick, as opposed to what we did. And
Sean's referencing a really fun stream we did on Friday. You can check it out on the Stealing Signals YouTube channel. 5 drafts, and all of them on the Stealing Bananas podcast feed. 5 drafts in about a 5.5 hour stream in the FFPC Fantasy Pros Championship. That was an absolute blast to do with you. We're both still, I think, recovering from that 2 days later. It was, I think, the longest stream that I've done. I mean, maybe ever. It was like longer than some of our draft streams that we've done, Sean.
I was trying to decide if we had ever hit the 6-hour mark on the NFL draft streams themselves, but I was thinking that this one probably was a little longer.
It may have been a little longer than the draft streams, and we've done day 2, we've done day 3, but the day 3, the picks come off quicker, and we didn't do the whole of day 3, I don't think. I'd have to go back and look, but that may have been the longest, concurrent stream that we have done.
And I was flying high until we finished. And then it was like a window closing. I was kind of thinking that we should have fired up a 6th draft. We should have extended it 1 more hour. That would have been fun. It would have been also interesting because as we were recording the intros and outros for the podcast version, we were having trouble following what was going on. No, that was amazing. Ben, how are you feeling about those teams a couple of days in?
Well, I love that note you just did, a little peek behind the curtain where we have a tendency. So the way that we do it is we record the really long show and then we record the intros and outros at the end. And Rashee Rice goes off there, Sean. He's going to pop up here on the screen in a second. He was sliding a little bit. He's a little bit buried in this room, probably because of that suspension risk. You think about the cut, all that, but it seems like that's not going to happen. I was hoping maybe we'd steal him in the 3rd. But yeah, it's a little peek behind the curtain. We record our full shows and then we do the intros and outros based on how we think that we're going to cut up the Stealing Banana shorts. And we, for this one, did a 5.5 hour show and then had to try to figure it out and then try to record the intros and outros. And I mean, I was seeing colors I was seeing sounds and hearing colors as I like to steal from the old Frank Caliendo, Bill Walton impersonation. I was hearing colors and seeing sounds, or whatever the hell he says.
Yeah, that was pretty awesome. We'll see about that Jared Goff pick. I'm going to try and push Jared Goff on you later in this draft. Evan Ingram goes off 2 picks ahead of where we are. Then as we get back here in round 3, we're going to have a shot at a tight end. There are still a lot of interesting receivers, kind of as you mentioned. If we can get to 4, then I like our chances to avoid those early chops. Zay Flowers, 1 pick ahead of us. So, I mean, you're kind of soft tier here, 25 to 29, all 5 of those. Well, Zay Flowers just goes, but the other 4 are still available.
Right. So I think the discussion becomes around T. Higgins or making the George Kittle pick. I don't suspect, or even going to Bowers if you want to. I don't suspect in this room we'll get Bowers coming back to us. What do you think about the early tight end pick, or just going to Higgins and continuing to build out the wide receiver depth? Or anyone
It's kind of interesting to see how tight end plays out. Sometimes these drafts are fun to explore how other people are going to do it, which requires you to pass. I think I'm Higgins here.
All right. We're going to grab T. Higgins. I like the idea of just building out a lot of receiver depth. I mentioned that home league I'm doing where I got Kincaid in the 3rd. I also took Gibbs in the 1st, and we're in the 5th round in that one. And I looked at some of the other drafters. One of my good buddies who reads a lot of my work and looks at my ranks, and we've talked about it a ton over the years. His application from the late draft slot was 4 straight wide receivers. And I was looking at his team a little bit ago. He started Nico Collins, DK Metcalf, and then I took Kincaid over Rashee Rice while I was at the park with my kids yesterday. And I almost immediately regretted it for the reasons you just said. And we just made this similar decision in the 3rd. Do you want that tight end, or do you want to just keep building the receiver depth? I pushed Rashee Rice. This friend grabbed him and Higgins at the 3-4 turn. So he started Nico, Metcalf, Rashee Rice, Higgins. And I was looking at his team and just salivating over it. Like, I was like, he's built a better team than me. So I like this idea of just the 4 wide receivers and immediately getting through the flex, winning the flex, and having that depth to really, because the tight ends can have their down weeks. I mean, Kittle can have a down week, right? Like, and certainly the Kittle conversation is a different one than even the Kincaid one. That was part of, my Kincaid selection. Part of that was the hope that he can have very consistent volume. Kittle's going to have some down games. We know that. You want to try to survive the chop. You want to think through the consistency a little bit. The wide receiver position is going to be more consistent than tight end. And this, again, is not tight end premium. So the tight ends are important, and they are, I think, a key part of builds, but also in an 18-person draft, it gets thin quick. Getting a lot of receiver depth is very viable as well.
And one of the things that pops out to me as you talk through that is that, Nico Collins in round 1, which is where he goes here, which is where you had referenced that your friend built the team out. That feels pretty rich. It also feels like there's not much of a gap in your top 4 receivers, but that's actually perfect, right? One of the mistakes people can make is to look at receiver, especially in this type of format. And this is specifically in the formats where receivers are incredibly important, as opposed to the formats like many home leagues, where it's the exact opposite, where you actually want to get that stud running back anytime the draft is flat. Anytime the draft is flat, you take a running back. Any other time, obviously, you go for your targets and try and build out receivers. This is sort of the opposite, where the only way that you can get to those 4 receivers is by starting with someone who maybe doesn't seem like a first-round pick. But by the time you have the 4, you're like, this group together accomplishes the objectives. You only get 1 pick in every round. And if you don't select, if you end up passing on receivers because you don't think the value is there, then you get 4, 5, 6 rounds in, and you just realize you haven't done nearly enough because you didn't want to select receivers in a flat area.
I'm having a fun time with these names in our room here, Sean. We have Roll the David Bell clip, who I believe might be Kevin Tompkins, who made the David Bell clip over at Ship Chasing. We have Don't Steal My Signals, Please, in the 4 hole, which I thought was pretty funny. Got Headless Horseman in the Guillotine. We have the Penultimate Warrior I liked in 8. there's some funny names throughout this build. Again, we're doing a listener league here, and people are going to take guys that we like. So Brock Bowers goes at 315. Xavier Worthy goes at the turn there. I'm glad that we got T. Higgins because it is going to get thin with the receivers that we want to target fairly quickly.
Then we have Frank Exchange of Views out of 7, which seems like it has to be Frank. So I enjoying that one. as well.
Oh, interesting. I'm sorry. I'm just getting caught up on who is available right now. Can
Josh
you see
Jacobs
the
and Joe
queue?
Mixon have gone at running back.
Okay.
That was after a long stretch there of receiver, where early in the third, and again, this is 18 teams, so very different in terms of what early in the third means. But Derrick Henry, Kenneth Walker, Isaiah Pacheco, and Travis Etienne.
Can you see the queue, or you were having some technical issues? Are you not able to
pull it up here?
See what we're working with? I'm going to start throwing some names in the queue. We're going to have to start speaking in code. All of these listeners are here. The chat wants to let you filibuster. There was some I saw Meatwad here said notice the rule, the David Bell clip. There was some questions about the format. So you can play these at guillotineleagues.com, but on Fantasy Life they do have some analysis around it and some strategy articles. And then yes, all pickups are based on fab. Tiger Uppercut was asking that question. Paul mentioning again, people forget it's not tight end premium. We always joke that people forget that FFPC is famously tight end premium. In this case, people forget it's not tight end premium. And we get Deontay at the 310. Found somebody higher on Deontay than me, Gretsch, Jacob, and Matt Harmon, which I would have taken it there. I'm not saying that's too high. In this format, consistent volume. All right, so JSN Sean goes. He was one that I had my eye on, maybe coming back. Your guy, Jaden Reed, has also gone. We are already into the thick of it a little bit at wide receiver. There's another pick that I wanted to ask you about in the queue, if it makes it back to us, that I think would be potentially interesting.
So a Dunze goes. We are up.
He was the last of a tier for me. Who have you added?
Okay. A player who, man, I hope we can get back through. So I've got Ben's rankings up as well. I do not want to take the top receiver available in his rankings.
That is Chris Godwin, folks. We don't need to take him. But do you mind this running back? Because I think this running back and then trying to get the other player through, the running back's fallen quite a bit.
Ben, I've been considering, yes, let's take him. Okay. I've been considering trying to move James Cook in our Dynasty League, even though he comes out looking very good in your 2024 projections.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind the idea that we got to be a little bit conscious of Cook and some of those things, and that maybe he's not that much better than some of the other backs that are going to go a little bit later. But in an 18-round draft, you can miss out on a lot of targets. We know we're in a listener league. Cook falling here behind like Javonte Williams, who he typically goes well ahead of in almost all formats. Several other running backs off the board. I have him as my literally my RB10, which is in part because I'm out on a lot of the other types of like I have Derrick Henry RB11, and some people would say you're absolutely insane for having James Cook over Derrick Henry, but he's 30-something years old, doesn't catch passes, and I have concerns about those types of backs generally. So a lot of other people would be like, oh, yeah, it makes sense that you're out on Derrick Henry. Well, not out. I mean, I've ranked him RB11, but, him and then behind him, Josh Jacobs and Joe Mixon and Pacheco and all of those guys have gone, and reasonably so because they typically do based on ADP and those things. But at this point, in an 18-team league, you're talking about a round and a half for every round. So at the end of 2, it's 3 rounds. At the end of 3, it's 4.5. We're halfway into 4. We're through at least 5 rounds, and it like basically into the 6th round a little bit here. And Aroma Dunze goes off the board there. He's the last of my wide receivers before a big tier break. The best receiver available you mentioned was Chris Godwin. Calvin Ridley went right after that. Brian Thomas. We already have the 3 receivers. I don't think we needed to push for one of those guys necessarily. I mean, I feel like Cook was a pretty good value, a nice pick there. Not that we were really ever setting out to be making running back picks. One of the things, again, about this format is you're going to add better players. So one of the things you want to think about is who are the players that are going to be so good that they can stay in your lineup all year, potentially. I don't know that Cook's that answer necessarily, which is why I probably wouldn't target a dead zone back in this format, because you could just go really cheap and then try to replace with a star, at some point. And maybe Cook's never really going to be that player. And yet it is sort of a high floor element in the early going for us here.
It is. And I think that when you are going to be making additions to your team every week, the wide receiver cliff means something a little bit different. And so players like Brian Thomas, Ladd McConkey, Hollywood Brown, who doesn't sound like he's going to play in week 1, those types of guys don't do nearly as much for you as they do in a system where you're going to have those players all year long. And when they really come through and start dominating weeks 5, 6, 7, what have you, it's a big win. In this, you probably will have other guys that you've added. So we get back to that free agent discussion. And one of the things that I think can be missed in terms of working through the free agent aspect of it is that a lot of guys are cut every week. And it's not just a matter of how do you manage the pickups from the players who were the first and second round picks, but how do you manage the pickups for the guys who were the 6th and 7th and 8th round picks? How do you add a guy like a McConkey or a Brown, a Brian Thomas, when those guys go out? I think being willing to make sure you're grinding waivers on that group that seems less transformational immediately is still very important in terms of building out the depth of your roster. That's the way that you can kind of have your cake and eat it too, where you're constantly improving the back half of your own team. Sometimes you're going to have breakouts that happen right after you picked someone up for almost nothing. And then that shifts what you can do or what you need to do subsequently when you have these players who are, again, first and second round types of picks who become available. I think that portion of it is a lot of fun as well. It can, we can get so focused on how do you manage the blind bidding for the superstars and fail to build out this roster that you can then wait. So the thing that you mentioned in your piece, and the thing that just seems very clear to me, is the way to do it, is that you win early, you build a super team, and then you wait. And you get to the final 6, 7, maybe even later 4 or 5 teams. And by that time, you have gotten back to sort of the front in terms of having the most fab available. That's when it's so important to have more than your league mates, not really weeks 2 through, say, 6 or 7.
Yeah, and we're almost up here, but we'll dig into that again in a second because that's a really interesting note. But I want to make sure. See, this is the pick you were hoping to come back, Shawn, did go there. It was David Njoku, a sharp pick by the Penultimate Warrior after starting with 4 straight wide receivers. That's the guy that was, I mean, man, the last tight end of a group for sure. We could go down to Dallas Goedert. I don't care to for any. I mean, Taysom Hill might be the next best tight end. He's a tight end in this format. We could go to an upside wide receiver, Ladd McConkey, Keon Coleman, Jamison Williams, or we could go to another running back. Alvin Kamara still sitting there in a stealing signals, stealing bananas room. Aaron Jones, Raheem Mostert are options. What are you thinking?
I think it is probably Aaron Jones.
Okay. I like that too. I am having trouble. I was thinking in looking at this that, so I was going to point out as well, Jordan Addison goes a little bit earlier in this round. And I thought that was a really sharp pick. He goes a little ahead of where he tends to sometimes, right now. And some of that with him is concerned that the DUI suspension could land in season for 3 weeks. But as we're talking about, you might have, you may have added whoever, Chris Olave at that point. Our team might have been chopped, and you might have added Cooper Kupp at that point, and then you just start him over Jordan Addison when he gets suspended. You were talking about a different type of risk for Hollywood Brown and like a DeAndre Hopkins who hasn't gone yet, where those guys are risks because they're not likely to play in week 1, and you're going to be able to replace dudes. But the risks like an Addison that are more long-term in playing time and those types of concerns. I mean, Addison looks like a really fun week 1 play as long as he's healthy. He did have a little bit of an issue in camp, but it sounds like that was not going to affect his status for week 1. Similarly, my concern with an Aaron Jones or Raheem Mostert is the longevity element of it. But I do think in week 1, these guys are going to be very involved. They have the spike potential. We know that they're, big play threats. I have Jones ranked 1 slot ahead of Mostert. And I think in this format, especially, like, part of my concern with Jones is does he really hold up? He's the type, though, that as long as he's active, I mean, almost more so than Cook, because the workload, I think, could be even more appealing in some ways. As long as he's active, he feels like a start, and that could be true into week 13 and into week 14.
If you're evaluating where he is early, like you are just discussing there, I mean, is he a better selection than Saquon Barkley, a better selection than Derrick Henry, a better selection than Isaiah Pacheco? I wrote Jones up, I think, in one of the home league pieces that I did recently, because there are some formats in which he's incredibly inexpensive. And I mean, he's inexpensive in every format, but some it gets extremely egregious, right? And you look at what he did last season, and it was a little bit worse than what he has done before, but in part only because he has been so utterly dominant. This is a guy who has been up at the top of the league in broken tackle percentage just throughout his career. And we're talking about a smaller guy who's extremely explosive, right? So when you have evaded tackles for someone like an Aaron Jones, they become big plays. They become long touchdowns. And you just even look at his playoff game last season and what he was able to do during that stretch. I mean, this is a guy where it's just very hard to understand why he wouldn't be valued several rounds earlier. And in part because, and this was the thing that we touched on a little bit during the Chasing Stolen Bananas show the other night. And by that, I mean the ship chasing show where we selected the team that I was involved with. And Ty Chandler is like a vaguely trendy player. And I think that people believe this is going to be a committee. I don't have any inside information. Obviously, every year we have these backfields where the starter is really good and the backup is not great, and it's still a committee and you're surprised. You have these situations where the starter is bad and the backup is awesome and it's not a committee and you're surprised. You can't simply look at the numbers and the highlights and the production and the track record and then be able to say what the coaches are going to do, because they have their own ideas. That's very well established. But Ty Chandler is somebody who they were very reluctant to play last year, even though Alexander Mattison was really struggling. And then once he did play, the peripherals for Chandler in most categories, according to Sports Info Solutions, were pretty disappointing. Now, I've liked Chandler in the past. I like the guys who are explosive. One of the reasons I really liked Chandler before is that you have a starter in Mattison who is just frankly slow. And as a result of that, the contrast between Mattison and Chandler set that up for Chandler to go out there, steal the job, create a lot of big plays in this offense where last year the Vikings were set up to be extremely explosive. So that looked good. Well, then you don't play particularly well, and now the starter is explosive. Like, where's the contrast for Chandler where the team is going to have incentive to really run him out there a lot? So that's my thought process behind it. As I said at the beginning, it doesn't mean we won't get week 1 and these guys will have the same number of touches. And then, like, why do we pick Aaron Jones?
Well, I mean, I think even if they are a split, Aaron Jones will play more in the pass game because he's so dynamic in the pass game. He'll be a better efficiency play because he's so dynamic as an efficiency back. There's an argument for Aaron Jones, even in a split, to be a really strong play as a high efficiency, high value touch guy. He'll get the goal line work, I would assume, because of he's been very good in that area, even though he's a lighter back, and then also just because of his status. Like, often these types of veterans who you bring in, you give a lot of money to, are the ones that you want the TDs to go to, just because It's just sort of the way that things play out.
And one of the pieces, beat covering the team, some speculation about how it might work. They're talking about this is like a 1A, 1B. Jones will handle 16 to 18 touches. Like, that's not really 1A, 1B in all likelihood. If it's 16 to 18, you're smooth sailing. Aaron Jones, over the last, I believe it's 4 years was the split. His average was 17 opportunities a game. On 17 ops, Jones is going to score. Yeah. I don't even necessarily think it'll be that high, but if he gets in that 15 range, you're going to do very well from this price.
All right, we are a couple spots away. I don't mind talking through this a little bit before we get on the clock, Sean. Hollywood Brown, DeAndre Hopkins are there. They're guys that aren't probably going to play in week one, and we probably would be able to replace their upside relatively quickly. Keon Coleman is still there as somebody that's a little more intriguing to me. Then there's the veteran wide receivers, right? Like, you can get into the Jerry Jeudy thing here, and I think he's a fine week one play that's also replaceable fairly quickly. So he would be that type of play. I mean, Dontayvion Wicks also, but he's, less of a routes certainty. He would also be in those guys would also be in consideration for me. It's kind of just whether you want to go with the rookie that has more long-term upside, I guess, and a Keon Coleman, but we're probably replacing anyway at a certain point, or go with a veteran that you might be able actually to float until week 4 or 5. Like, I kind of think that's the way I would want to play it. Although, I mean, and the other thing is that if Hollywood Brown's only out for 1 week, like, maybe he makes the most sense as well because the Mahomes element. Or we could do a running back as well. There's some intriguing running backs, and you can flex the running back in this other flex spot. Some tight ends, a QB run has come off. I think there's a lot of directions here. I guess we are on the clock now. Jeudy goes 1 pick ahead of us. So good thing I talked all the way through that and made it clear what I was thinking. Maybe that person was already going to draft him anyway. I think I like the running, like Tyjae Spears is here. I think I like just taking Tyjae Spears and starting him week 1. What are you thinking?
Yeah, this is going to sound like absolute blasphemy, but I was going to suggest Najee Harris. He did go a couple of picks back. This is Tyjae Spears.
Okay. We are in agreement there. We go ahead and take him. We were thinking more 0 RB, maybe get 4 straight wide receivers, but it is a Stealing Bananas listener league. And so we are now taking a whole bunch of running backs.
One of the great things about the 3 wide receiver start, right, is that it does give you that foundation. And then when the draft flips to running back being clear cut, and again, you mentioned 2-2-2 as the format, then you can get those good running back values. One of the things that is nice is that we got to pick in the middle. And from the middle, you can kind of manage the runs in what an 18-person draft, right? You're going to have some serious runs. If you're on the edges, there's not a lot you can do to manage how some of these guys come off the board.
Our guy Christopher here is in the chat. He is in the draft as well. He said, I'm going to be honest, the way that one of the turns in an 18-team league is brutal. I don't envy you on that. I love that we are in the middle here, Sean, but in my 2 reader league slows, I got the 1 and the 18. So I will be on the ends in both of those slow drafts and trying to remember 34 picks later. I will say that anybody who's in the draft who's watching, anything we can do to speed things up to keep these guys on the end engaged is probably helpful. Chris says it's terrifying. Appreciate that you guys are here with us to draft. And I mean, I know one of our drafters had something to do at 5 p.m. Eastern. I assured him that I did not expect this to take 2 hours. So I hope to be correct in that. It is a long 18 pick round every time for sure. A lot goes on in between our picks. Sean, we were talking a little bit ago about bid strategy and spending early and those things, and I said we'd get back to that. One of the things that I wrote in my article, and again, to reference Paul's great work over at Fantasy Life, he showed some great data that showed, like, for example, he pulled a player to use as an example, but showed how Travis Kelce was less and less expensive for his average pickup in these types of leagues last season, from the first month to the second month to the third month to the fourth month throughout the season. And there's a couple reasons for that. That's going to be true of anybody in any fantasy league because there's less money in the pool, right? If that player got picked up later, they're going to tend to be smaller bids. If, in the early going, obviously, like you can get the $600 bids that you can't necessarily get in December. And so that's just one of the things that's going to play into that reduces the overall money in the pool. But the other side of it that's really interesting is with the guillotine element, every week, somebody's $1,000 of fab is removed from the pool. So we're starting with $18,000 of fab, and money will be spent that will decrease that, but also a team will be removed every week, and whatever amount they have remaining will be pulled out of the ecosystem. And in most cases, it will be the people who have been trying to save. Because if if you go out and you spend early, you are disproportionately likely to have a better roster and to not be cut in weeks 2, 3, and 4. If you go out and spend big after week 1 or after 2 or after 3, and the people who are trying to just get by and then save their money are disproportionately more likely to get chopped just because they're going to be behind the 8 ball a little bit on those teams that have added. And I think you think about it as like, oh, I can make my way through the first 5 or 6 weeks, but you think about like week 5, and if you haven't made any ads, your team is now really, really behind because there's 5 other teams in the league that have an extra first round pick. There's 5 other teams that might have an extra second round pick. Maybe there's some overlap where some of those teams have taken 2 additional pieces onto their roster. But you're now at a point 5 weeks in where there's 13 teams left, and there's been so much talent put into the pool that if you have not made a move by that point, most of the other teams have additional high leverage pieces, and you're now behind. It's like in poker, if you play in a tournament poker situation, if you just try to sit there and stay where you were at the beginning, you had 100 chips at the beginning and you're playing a little home poker game and you're trying to stay at 100 chips. As people leave the table, the chip stacks are the top guys are all at 300, and now your 100 is not the same anymore, right? Everybody else is a lot stronger. And so you do have to think about that proactively, whether you want to be moving early. And I think Paul made some great points that, look, $1 in September gets you, I think the way that he figured it was it's worth $10 in December based on the average of how these guys go. But also if you control for the ecosystem and how much money is available to be spent and the percentage of that, I do think you'll start to understand that like it's okay to spend some early, and then later your dollar will go further, in part because there's only like 5 or 6 teams to compete with, and a lot of them will have spent throughout that time as well, because it is pretty tough to navigate without spending anything.
It is. And one of the most fun things when you are following the scoreboard on Sundays and certainly on Monday night is to hope that those teams that have you covered, that one of them is the team that gets chopped, and that you can little by little move back to the top of the leaderboard in terms of who has the most remaining to spend. The flip side of it sometimes is that those teams, as you just described, will be the weakest, and so they send weaker players into the pool, but not having them still around to be able to bid over you as it comes to the crucial weeks is a fun part of it. And again, I think that's why the middle path has a lot of potential success, because you have stayed alive, you've built a good team, and then if you pull back and you make a lot of $1 ads, as opposed to continuing to decrease your budget to where you couldn't possibly get back into the mix with the other top teams. Because one of the things too, when you go down the stretch, if you are a little bit covered when there are 5 teams left, but then a loaded team gets chopped, they can't prevent you from selecting some of those players, right? They can cover you on one guy, but if 6 elite players go back into the pool, you're going to get one.
We are all the way back up here, Sean. We've basically filled our starting lineup through the flex. Hollywood Brown's still here. Romeo Dobbs just went. Adonai Mitchell has gone. Darnell Mooney has gone. Khalil Shakir went last round. To me, like it sounds like he might only miss week 1. And we're probably going to add by that point, but there are some scenarios where we might want to be plugging him in week 2. Is that something you'd consider here? Do you want to go a different direction? I don't see a clear tight end pick. I think the other one for me might be going over to quarterback at this point. We got 20 seconds.
No, I think the thesis for Hollywood is perfect at this price.
All right, cool. We are going to add to our wide receiver room. It's at this point, we're not going to play him week 1. We don't need to play him week 1. We have a starting lineup through the flex here. We're hoping he's back for week 2 and gives us our first bench player that could potentially help in week 2 if we're not able to win a bidding war in week 1 for the guys that we're going to probably be aggressively going after, because we just talked through our bidding strategy being a little bit more aggressive overall. I mean, look, it's our listener league, Shawn. If anything, we got to be aggressive to make sure that we don't go out in week 2. We got to get a good enough team to at least get to like week 8. And then if we fall because we don't have any money left to spend, at least we stuck around for a little while.
Again, that's the great thing about what Fantasy Life has put together here. Going to have some drafts after week 1, after week 2, after week 3. That's certainly my understanding. That's your understanding as well. Correct, Ben? If we go out, we just have to start another league.
Yeah, we'll just start some more Stealing Bananas listener leagues in week 2, week 3. That is the fun part of it. These are 18-team drafts. They are planning. They're going to eventually have paid leagues they're rolling out. They're planning right now to have leagues available to be created after every week. So after 2, 3, 4 weeks, pull out the rest of season rankings, get 14 of your friends together after 4 weeks, and do a 14-team guillotine for the other 13 weeks of fantasy season. That will be, you'll cut 13 players and leave 1 in week 17 as the champion. I think that's a cool element of it as well. There's this sort of second chance element. And also, if you get chopped early in one of these leagues and you want to give it another try, you can do that. You can start up another league.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I think that this is the perfect home league format, right?
It is.
I love doing the high stakes leagues the way that we do them. If I had to start a home league right now, it would be a Guillotine League.
And it's exactly right. And me and my buddies, we have a keeper league we've had for a long time, but they've been interested in this Guillotine League format for a couple of years. One of them heard about it. We had a discussion in our Slack channel, and like I said, we started one this year. I mentioned to him this year that I was going to be doing a little bit of content around it and stuff, and we decided to start one up. And we're in the middle of a slow draft right now, and they're all loving it. But the thing that's so fun about it is this is a group of home leaguers that a lot of them most of them don't care about fantasy football nearly as much as I do, or a lot of people, they're home leaguers. They're having a good time with it. A few of them might check out some of the different, content streams and things, but for the most part, they're just hanging out. And it is tough in a home league if you're not that into fantasy football and your team's not good to stay engaged the whole year. And it creates those competitive balance issues where down the stretch, you got a guy who's not sending his lineup and he's giving another team, a league mate, a free win. And that can make the difference between that other guy making the playoffs or missing the playoffs, which can screw somebody else in the league over. And that can always be a problem in home leagues. We've all seen that happen a million times. In this format, it truly is one of the biggest selling points to me is if your team's not good, you no longer have to worry about it because it's gone. You just lose and you're done. And the other part of it that's so fun is, and there's people that have fantasy leagues where they actually vote someone out and those types of things. I love the idea that starting week 1, one of my buddies is going to get booted, or me is going to get booted out of this league after 1 week. And everyone else is going to say, hi, you were the one who got booted after week 1. Hopefully that's not me. But I think that's a really fun part of it too, where it's just every week somebody's gone. It's just, you're done.
Well, and you can think about all of the fun things you can do in a home league setting where the people who are booted or are chopped after every week. You could set up a calendar, a schedule throughout the season where each week's chop requires a different task or dare or challenge to be met by the folks in your league. You maybe throw some money in for charity on completion of those elements. You can do so many things with this, and yet the format itself does the chopping for you. You don't have to be involved in anything like that. Then after we took Hollywood Brown, Jerome Ford, Curtis Samuel, Caleb Williams, Blake Corum, Ty Chandler, Jalen Wright, Rashid Shaheed, Chuba Hubbard, Ezekiel Elliott, Taysom Hill, Austin Eckler come off the board. The pick that stands out to me there is Chuba, where, again, you think about how it's going to help you get through the initial chops that pick is really strong compared to a lot of the, I wouldn't say compared to, but like I would have loved for our pick actually to be Chuba. Thinking through it, we have some of the young running backs going off the board. Those names I think are interesting because again, your starting lineup is set. You get through a couple weeks. Adding a high upside stash at this point is now something that is very palatable because that's also like addressing those positions that otherwise you would bid for. And when the bidding is so crucial and to save money is so crucial, adding players in like Jalen Wright and Bucky Irving, who both go to the drafter here out of 15, I think that's a really sharp pivot now that we've gotten into this range of the draft.
And Shawn, Trevor Lawrence goes the last of my sort of targets in my list for quite a while here. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 of the 18 teams have taken a quarterback. And we're in that range where, you know, the next best are now like Brock Purdy, Tua, Jared Goff, Cousins, Herbert, Rodgers. There's several names, Geno, Matthew Stafford, Bo Nix. And I don't think a lot of people are going to take 2 QBs. I was going to float Lawrence, or maybe if Caleb Williams came back, which he did go. I think at this point, it's like, do we just take a last round quarterback? I mean, I don't feel any pressure at all now to take a quarterback. You get to this point and you're like, it's one big group the rest of the way. And we're just basically looking for a 1 week streamer who can get us some week 1 points, even if that is just Bo Nix or what have you, because there's going to be quarterbacks hitting the waiver wire every week, right? A starting quarterback every week. These 13 that have been drafted, I'm not saying one of them is definitely getting chopped week 1. You definitely are. But there's going to be, you know, some quarterbacks that are going to get chopped, and it could be one of these good ones in the early going.
Yeah, we would just send out the request into the universe. Don't select Bo Nix. We want him to be our final pick. Ben, where are you now on a guy like Jonathan Brooks, where you're going to have to really wait? But once he does come back and start playing, he's more like a second round pick.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how long we want to hold that. By the time he comes back, there's a lot of good players in the ecosystem. It feels to me like, I mean, it's been so long to draft him. And at the same time, it feels to me like it reduces your flexibility. But if you want to stash him, I'm definitely open to it.
Yeah, I think
let's do it.
Wide receiver 63 is my second place choice here.
I don't see that. Who's the name? Oh, you're saying it's way down the list.
Well, no, I'm just saying, I'm just giving you. No, let's go with Brooks here.
On my list. I didn't have time to get over there. We're out of time. I understand what you mean. You meant on my list of wide receivers. A coded message that I missed. I figured out who the name is with 3 seconds. Didn't have time to pull him up. Yeah, we'll stash Brooks. We'll see what happens. I do think Brooks is a high upside enough play that you're essentially like, if we were to go grab somebody really good in the early going, I would be more comfortable cutting some of the players maybe we took above him, or like you think about like 3, 4, 5 weeks down the road, if Tyjae Spears is somebody that we've decided to move on from, or maybe even James Cook, right? Like this is not enough of a ceiling for what we have on our roster, but we are still stashing Jonathan Brooks at that point because we think this is a guy who, like you said, if healthy, maybe is a second round pick type of value, is that type of runner.
I think it fits in with the idea that we've articulated where, I mean, we're not going to spend like 800 in week 1, and someone might, and it might be a really good choice, right? But we will probably at least be in the mix for the first round pick that gets chopped. If we win that player, add him to this roster, and then we don't splurge in weeks 2, 3, 4, and then Brooks comes back and we have the first round pick that's chopped in week 1 who's been helping us through, and now we have Brooks added to the team that we currently have. That would be kind of my way of thinking about it, where Brooks then gives you that additional bridge to say week 8 before perhaps you're going big again in free agency.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Jalen Tolbert does go off 3 picks later. That was wide receiver 63 on my list, which after I then announce to everyone that wide receiver 63 on my list was who you were talking about. Probably wasn't too hard to figure out for anyone who's listening. I'm not saying that's definitely what happened, but it may have been, or Tolbert was just due to go there. So at this point, Shawn, we've gone Garrett Wilson, Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, James Cook, Aaron Jones, Tyjae Spears, Hollywood Brown, Jonathan Brooks. Hollywood Brown, Jonathan Brooks, both probably not going to play week one, or I think certainly not going to play week one. We have the other 6 that we're going to be putting in our starting lineup. We have not addressed either of the onesie positions. Starting to get a little bit scared that we're going to get chopped in week one. I'm a little bit concerned. I got to be honest with you. If we're not going to have a strong starting lineup at either onesie spot and only an 18 league, we only got 3 good receivers before we had to start taking those running backs that, they can always let you down. Are we going to get chopped in week one?
No. One of the reasons that you can be a little risk-taking here, especially if you do like your 6 non-onesie starters, then we only have to stay ahead of one team in that first week, which...
Famous last words.
It is. That's exactly what I was thinking. And, if we get chopped in week one, we put the audio back out there, put the board back out there, and we start up the league again.
That's right.
No, there are still some names, I think, that will help us through. I don't believe, especially in week one, I don't believe we're going to get a huge gap between the quarterbacks who have gone and some of the quarterbacks who are left.
I agree with that. And I think we'll be okay at QB. I think we can find ourselves a nice floor play at QB, regardless of, who that name may be. I'm a little bit concerned about tight end, where I said Taysom Hill out loud and shouldn't have. And again, who knows if that's why the drafter at 18 was thinking Taysom Hill at that point. But I think he would have been actually kind of a fun pick in hindsight, because I do think they're going to use him quite a bit early without, Kendrick Miller out there. And it's Jamal Williams. It's Alvin Kamara. Taysom Hill, not going to catch a lot of passes as a tight end, but it's not tight end premium. You get him as a runner and a goal line threat. He's actually a really nice early season tight end in a format like this.
If he's your best quarterback, your best running back, and your best tight end, then probably in some way, shape, or form, he will score some points in week one.
I mean, you're a Derek Carr guy, but Derek Carr catching some strays there. Alvin Kamara was always going to catch some strays there. We are around the 8-9 turn. Only 14 rounds in this draft. We have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've taken 8 picks. Only 6 more picks for us to go here, Shawn. Luke Musgrave just went off. Pat Freiermuth has gone off. Dalton Schultz has gone off. Tight end is getting thin. I think there's essentially a lot of options at this point at tight end the rest of the way. So same thing as quarterback, where it's like you don't really need to prioritize anything at this point because it feels very, very balanced. But
every team now across our next 2 picks has a tight end. The drafter in 3, agreeing with you, doesn't have a tight end, but did not take one in 9. So we'll get 2 more picks before it comes back around to them. Again, not that you couldn't get a couple of tight ends here. One of the things, again, that we have done previously is stash tight ends. We've gotten to where we had like 3 tight end 1 players on our team. You don't necessarily start them all, but you take them out of the pool for the other teams that you're competing with when you're down to, say, 7 or 8 teams. And if you're down to 7 or 8 and 2 of them don't have a viable tight end starter, those teams are more likely to get chopped than you are.
So we'll almost certainly pass on tight end here. Brock Purdy went at the turn. He was the last of a certain type of tier for me. I mean, I do have him in a little bit of a higher group than the other pocket passers that I mentioned earlier, Tua, Goff, all of those types. But I guess not so much that I would have chased him there. We are on deck. I think we're just kind of looking because like it's getting thin everywhere. Samaje Perine just goes, we are up Jalen Naylor went in this round. You know, a lot of names have gone off in the later round mold. What position do you like going with here?
Well, if I said that the player we drafted at tight end 27 actually is appealing to me, is that a direction you would want to go?
I feel like he's gonna doom you in this type of format, but I'm happy to. I was thinking about him. I'm happy to just put him in.
Do you want to take Braylon Allen? Is he there? No, he just went a couple picks ago.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking like a boring wide receiver, which does nothing for you. I don't know why I was thinking that. Let's just take your guy Cole Kmet. He's going to have some 2-target games. We're going to get chopped when he does. It's the exact type of profile that I would be terrified of.
Then if those 2 targets are going to be 30-yard touchdowns. I mean, one of the things that was interesting to me about preseason is that there is all the coverage of the routes and not a lot of talk about the targets and Cole Kmet getting open down the field.
Yeah.
I don't want to ignore the routes element, but it's important to understand what the game plan is when these players are being deployed and what Cole Kmet brings you if he actually is schemed a certain number of plays in any individual game.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, I was going to say that I've been like, I was still taking a decent amount of him as he slid in some of the best ball formats. Was definitely open to taking him with you. I mean, that was one where you wanted to take him a little earlier, and then it became a thing of him or Shipley, and so you were kind of starting to lean Shipley, but I kind of pushed us back towards Kmet because I do agree with this point where people are so focused on the routes that they're not paying attention to the fact that, again, this guy had a breakout last season, really saw some meaningful bump in targets per out run, a lot of these other elements. The overall volume, not really as strong as you'd like to see, which was masked by the Justin Fields offense, right? That's natural based on the team that they're playing on. But he is very much a player that, to me, took a step forward as an age 24 wide or tight end. He was a 21-year-old rookie all those years ago. It's been 4 years now, and people are like, wow, he's clearly not breaking out. Well, when he's that young, and tight end's a position that it does take several years to happen, and I would argue it happened last year. When you look at the peripherals, when you look at some of the stuff where he did take a pretty big step forward, that was something that was very apparent in the preseason, was even though his routes weren't great, he was getting targeted constantly, right? It's not like they were throwing to Gerald Everett all that much either. It was like, when I say constantly, I think it was like 3 or 4 targets, but like in a situation where the first team wasn't playing a ton, the first drive in the first game, I think Caleb only played like 1 drive. He got 2 quick targets in that one, even though his routes didn't look good. Caleb played longer in the other game, and I don't know that he got targeted a bunch in that one, but at least once or twice. And it was this thing where it's like, okay, well, if his routes are bad, but he's still going to get like 2 targets and a half on average because he got 2 in 1 drive in the first game. I mean, 4 fairly high value targets is not a bad floor outcome. And then what if the routes do, because like Gerald Everett's a 30-year-old tight end. Like, what if he gets hurt? Then what happens? Now Cole Kmet's a fantastic pick in some of these spots. I just worry.
Well, I think that too. He started out his career slowly in the red zone, but then the last couple of years has been a good scorer. And one of the things that's, I think, easy to miss with Kmet is that unlike a lot of the guys who are extremely athletic at tight end, you think of the tight end stars, they're athletic but small. Now, I mean, small within the context of what you would expect for an NFL tight end. Cole Kmet is explosive and is a big dude, right? He's someone who, if you have one of these kind of spike seasons for someone where they run really hot on touchdowns in a functional Bears offense. And I think for me, it's still, the question is not whether Cole Kmet's going to be involved. The question is whether or not the Bears are going to do what their talent indicates that they're going to do, right? If they do that, then Cole Kmet could easily have a 10 touchdown season.
Right. So you're betting more on the efficiency side, which I do think makes some sense. Sorry, I'm making some tweaks to my rankings while we record.
So Some interesting names have gone here. The other name that I've been kind of thinking of, but forgot as we were actually on the clock, was Jalen McMillan. I've been taking him in basically every draft that I participated in the last week. Marvin Mims, I think, is maybe it's not even stealth, but very interesting, even though the range of outcomes for him is anything from being a star to being the last guy on their depth chart.
Well,
Gabe Davis is interesting there, even though we like the other guys. Adam Thielen, from like a volume floor perspective, might be interesting. Wandale, I think, is interesting. Still some good receiver names going on.
I think Mike Williams is interesting, even though it's a format where, you're probably not starting in week 1, but he's going to play week 1. And I don't think you mentioned him. But he's another one that I think actually for me is among the front of that group. What are we going to say?
I'll be interested to see what he does in week 1. In terms of trying to kind of read the tea leaves a little bit, you might just have a lot more information. I guess I'm skeptical that he's going to have a big route share in week 1, but this team is very much Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. Right. It's one of the reasons that Tyler Conklin is interesting. He might be a backup tight end possibility for us here. There should be targets for Mike Williams if there are routes.
Well, you know who I want to take for a backup tight end, but you're just not going to get there. You're going to just keep ignoring the obvious. And so we're just going to keep pretending like it's not going to work, but it's definitely going to work. Do you have any interest in,
you're talking about your next ranked guy, Noah Fant?
No, I'm talking about the guy ranked after him that I secretly want to rank ahead of Noah Fant.
Well, I don't know what's stopping you because
no one's drafted either of them.
Well, that's true. But also, I love Noah Fant. Right? He's extremely athletic. He was a first-round pick when he was actually being used in an offense. He had dynamism that he brought to the table. This is one of those. I don't understand why Noah Fant and like Greg Dulcich are being drafted in such different spots. They seem like I say different. They're late, but it's a very similar thesis.
We are up. I was gonna actually suggest Jared Goff as like we're already in the 10th. There's only I guess there's 5 more picks, but there's not a ton left to go. There is a drafter behind us who doesn't have a QB yet. You kind of want to maybe take your best swing. But maybe we just keep pushing that. Is there another pick that you...
No, let's take your tight end.
Oh, all right. We're going to grab Juwan Johnson, who I have been trying to force Shawn to draft in every draft. It's the exact type of pick that he doesn't like. You've heard me talk about him before, though. I think the listeners have. I think the... sort of routes-based, available targets-based play, like you mentioned with Conklin. But with Johnson, I think there's a little bit more skill-based upside. Conklin's a very competent target owner and should be fine. It's a very similar thing, though. When these tight ends are in offenses that don't have a number 2 weapon, to me, Juwan Johnson's thesis looks a lot like Logan Thomas's in Washington a few years back, and he ended up having a really strong volume season. I've mentioned this, but he averaged over 5 targets per game after Michael Thomas got hurt the rest of the way in like the final 8 or 9 games. And he was basically operating in that short intermediate range. It's a new offense and he's been hurt all August. So maybe he gets off to a slow start. I don't know, but I think it's possible he's like a 5-6 target a game tight end, which in the late rounds is a very meaningful role.
It is. And I'm not against playing that 3rd tight end pick as well, because it's not just a matter of avoiding the chop in week 1. We also want to avoid the chop in week 2. And week 1 might give us some very important information about our tight ends, such that we can cut the ones that don't make sense going forward. We can start the appropriate one in week 2. I don't know that depth at the other positions here is that meaningful, because just so many of those guys are going to definitely go the way of free agency. Now, that being said, you think of a 14-round draft, and the first thing that pops into your mind is, okay, there are going to be some players on waivers who are interesting in addition to the guys who get chopped. But again, with 18 teams, we're already at the Luke McCaffrey, Roman Wilson, DJ Chark area for wide receiver. It's going to be very thin there as we think through what's going to happen. If Hollywood is not ready for week 2, if one of our guys gets injured in week 1, I mean, you could be forced to make an aggressive play with your week 1 free agent pickups. But I do like that we've waited on the onesies. I don't have any regret. You asked if we were going to get chopped. I like the way the draft has played out here, and that I think those original 8 picks are very strong.
Yeah, I feel good about it as well. And really, at this point, it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, you got to draft 14 players because you need to have 14 players. But we're going to be aggressive on waivers early, and one of these last picks is going to be a QB, and I'm kind of like, all right, well, the rest of these guys are probably just going to be our early cuts, which is just sort of how it works. But I mean, it also frees some things up. I would probably prefer the rest of the way, Shawn, to be focused on guys that are potentially really intriguing week 1 options, which, like not options for week 1, but week 1 storylines, right? And so like a Jalen Tolbert, like you suggested a little bit ago, somebody took Malik Washington last round. We've talked about him a little bit recently. There could be some intrigue there early in the season. We already have a couple longer term stashes, guys that are easy to cut if week 1 doesn't work out. That might mean another tight end, Shawn, in case we can't get into a good tight end. Maybe the team that's chopped early is another one that waited on tight end like ours. Maybe we want to play Komet, Juwan, and more to see what the tight end that looks the best in week 1 from a role perspective is. The other thing I did mention was, just prioritizing the QB, right? So I was going to mention Goff. They're at home against the Rams. That game has a 50-point total in week 1. They're favored. Could be a little bit of a shootout. We actually have Cooper Kupp. It was like, that would be a fun fit. He went 1 pick before us in the last round. I'm trying to look for other spots that I'm like, yeah, this is a great week 1 quarterback target. Geno's a guy that we love and talk a lot about. Tua goes there. But he's got the Broncos at home, the Bo Nix offense. Sean Payton likes to play slow. I am a little worried about – I think Bo Nix is going to have a strong floor, but I'm a little worried about Payton just sort of being slow and doing all of his formational, substitutions and everything on offense. And they played lower scoring games last year and kind of tried to slow things way, way down. Not sure what the Seahawks will be like this year. I don't think they're going to be the same old Pete Carroll team. I think actually there's a likelihood they'll be very up-tempo and quick, and so maybe Gino's the answer there as a home favor, but that game has a low team or a low over-under. Tua is at home in a game that has a 49.5 over-under, which was another sharp pick by one of the other wait on QB drafters. I didn't really land on anything of note there at all. Matthew Stafford's on the other side of that Goff game, so he just went too. He would be another good option. What were you going to say?
Yeah, so those are both really nice QB selections by drafters who didn't have one yet. I think every team except for ours now has a QB.
So we wait. Which means, what do we do?
Well, the name that I had mentioned to you to do this kind of 3 tight end and be safe would be Conklin.
Okay. Yeah. Let's do it. Tyler Conklin. Yeah, we're the tight end drafters. I'm excited. Fant went. Ben Sinnott went. Isaiah Likely. TJ Hawkinson even as a stash. Conklin is the clear top tight end on my board. I guess not clear because Hunter Henry is also available. He's a few spots behind Conklin on my board. But anyway, Conklin was the top tight end, and I think that was a good call. It gives us a third option. We do have the Garrett Wilson play as well. Gives us more on the Jets passing game. That can be a risk, right? Like if we went and played Aaron Rodgers on top of this, which I don't think you're going to suggest, and I don't necessarily want to do either. If we went and did that, the concern obviously would be that Aaron Rodgers did something like tore his Achilles 4 snaps into the season, and then it was really bad for his score and for Garrett Wilson's score and potentially for Tyler Conklin's score. Hopefully that doesn't happen again.
My reaction to it was pretty restrained last year because I was still like pretty literally in shock from the J.K. Dobbins injury. There was a big part of me that as it happened was like, this is actually worse for our teams than J.K. Dobbins being injured because it crushes our first round pick and we're going to keep playing that pick. So you don't even have the benefit of being able to move on. You just now have a low scoring player in your lineup. Then if we get an early Aaron Rodgers injury this season, the reaction is going to be pretty bad.
We're just going to walk into the ocean. We'll just call it good.
And Tyler Conklin is tight end 16 in tight end premium, which I think, he goes ahead of Cole Kmet. It's a little interesting, I think, that he lasted so long here. Obviously, this isn't the premium, but it's also not the half PPR, where maybe you're looking for a bigger touchdown threat. I don't get too fired up about floor tight ends. It's not the way that we like to play. We really, really wanted David Njoku to come back one more pick. But I think that the value here is fantastic when you contrast it to, receivers who, probably don't play a ton in week one in the same round.
Yeah, I love the heavy tight end thing that we're doing right now, where it's a position we clearly gave up. QB is going to be more replaceable on the wire, but we're going to get information at tight end. All of these picks are going to be cuts. Like we just saw Javon Baker, Jordan Whittington, Quentin Johnson, Trey Tucker, Jalen Hyatt go. Hyatt, I think, actually has some potential to be like a really intriguing week one play. Those other four, I would predict get cut really quickly in this season, just sort of based on what I expect from their roles and those things. Maybe we'll see something out of Whittington. Maybe there'll be a role there. Maybe Quentin Johnson will do some stuff really early in the season and look great. Who knows? Maybe I'm, too confident in that, but we'll probably cut the tight ends as well. Everyone in this range is going to be cut. And yet I think it gives our particular build something interesting to look at. And that's what you should be thinking through in these late rounds. Like, you're going to cut these guys. There's going to be so much talent in the waiver wire. What do you do in these late rounds? Like, what can help you, not just in week 1 and week 2, week 3, before you're replacing that also. And for us last round, it was, let's take a third tight end so that by week 2, we can feel confident in one of them, hopefully. Shawn, I'm not opposed to taking a 4th and maybe even a 5th.
Yeah. Any position that you have a need with, you want to attack in these forms. I think that one of the things that I have run across when I'm doing some co-managed leagues with drafters who have spent, 3-4 months doing really high volume of best ball is that there is a little bit of an adjustment back to where you are thinking about redraft from this idea of positional balance. And that's not the way to look at it. Now, I don't want to suggest that positional balance doesn't matter at all, and that it's not a big deal if you leave yourself way short somewhere. But you can continue to hammer the position where you have a weakness and rebalance through waivers as the season goes along. You don't necessarily need to add a receiver that you don't expect to play just because you're looking at your team and saying, well, we only have 4 receivers. I usually feel more comfortable with 7. Right? That's not the way that redraft works, and it's certainly not the way a Guillotine League works.
Yeah, that's the big thing you always have to remember through this draft, through the season, is there's going to be more talent available. You're going to be able to address things. And so the idea of a roster clogger in this format is, it's kind of funny because they won't become a roster clogger. They're going to be easy to cut because there's going to be so many better players. But like that type of play is so easy to, I think, avoid and not value, because there's just, sort of a, what are you waiting for? I don't know how to frame what I'm trying to say, but it's a a very unique thing with the amount of talent and only a 14-team roster. Like, you're going to have to move on from a lot of these picks. So you got to think about the picks that aren't going to force you to move on. Will Shipley finally goes there, Sean. I thought of him a few rounds ago. He's been the top guy on my list for a while. I'm surprised you never brought him up because I just missed that. He could be a guy who has a big week 1 role.
Then I have the 0 RB candidates countdown update getting ready to come out. Even in the last week, it has been crazy to see how much the people on the original list have moved up just in the course of a week. Now, a little bit of that, maybe the list, a little bit of it is that those are players people should be drafting. And so the fantasy community is on them. I definitely haven't been able to move Will Shipley, though. There is no interest in this draft. He goes after Carson Steele, Kenneth Gainwell, who is legitimately probably still in front of him for week 1. Alexander Madison, Cam Akers, Dylan Lowby, Justice Hill, Jamal Williams, Tank Bigsby. All of us Shipley fans are just sad for his theoretical fantasy existence. Obviously, the real life Shipley doesn't care, but the fantasy Shipley is like, why does no one love me? It's like, I'm fast. I catch passes. I'm a competitor. I'm the best player on this running back depth chart. Don't put me last every time.
Why does no one love me? We love that. That is, I mean, you've showed some restraint not drafting him here. You're typically
Ben's always like, why did we just pick Will Shipley? That's 2 rounds ahead of ADP.
It's usually happening before I'm ready for it to happen. We're back up, Sean. I'm still doing QB research. I mean, I think it's fairly clear, actually. Is that something you'd be okay doing right now? Just getting our QB, if I said the name that I think it should be?
Yeah, go for it.
I think Geno is probably it. They're 5.5-point favorites. I went through all the games. They're at home. None of the high total games are great. I'm a little concerned I mentioned about the Denver stuff, but they're going to come out throwing.
What do you think about making a really strong statement that no one else should take a second QB, taking Cousins here and then taking Geno coming back around?
I'm okay with that. Cousins is in a little bit of a trickier. Oh, we just auto-picked Michael Mayer. Ran out of time.
That's also a good selection. I mean, there's still a chance
some
that
extra
Brock
tight
Bowers...
ends. I had put some extra tight ends in the queue just in case. Just in case we wanted to go to the 4th QB or the 5th QB, and I was not paying attention to the clock at all. It's usually Sean that's on the 1s and 2s. I went ahead. I'm in charge this time, and I went ahead and blew that one. But we got a 4th QB, and then both of our. So Kirk Cousins goes 2 picks later. Frank Exchange of Views decided really needed to handcuff Joe Burrow. So here's the thing about Cousins. He's at home as well. He's a smaller favorite, only a 3-point favorite. The game total is same ballpark. It's
is the projection 3 to negative 14? I mean, how are you a 3-point favorite against the Pittsburgh Steelers?
That's the other part of it is it's the Steelers and Arthur Smith. We know this, and especially in a game where he's playing his old team, is not going to go down without wasting all the time he possibly can so he doesn't lose by 14 points. He's going to lose by 7 in this one because that's what he does best.
Should football be coached by people who like football?
Yeah, probably. But I mean, people who don't like
Arthur
to lose
Smith
by a
out
lot.
there is having someone in charge. I don't know.
This game's going to be 20-13, and that's going to be the final score. So anyway,
you think the Steelers are going to put up a point in this game? Are they going to switch? Are they going to switch horses in midstream?
Would you put it that way? No, I don't actually believe that. Justin Herbert goes. We're about to run out of all of our QBs after Michael Meredith, Geno Smith. The whole chat has decided that
now we have to
lose.
We do deserve to lose. We're going to get chopped. This is perfect. It's perfect though. It's better for content.
It is good. There's still a lot of QBs that we can play in week 1. I was just excited about those ones. I am not at all concerned here, Sean. We'll play Sam Darnold week 1 and we'll be just fine. There's a lot of options like that will
Can I
work.
suggest to you that we take the gunslinger option of playing Justin Fields in week 1?
He's not
in
starting.
one quarter. Right. But in the fourth quarter of week 1, don't you think that'll be enough points to keep us from the chop? Okay.
No, I don't. Kevin, now you are getting Bo Nix. That's the way that the cookie crumbles. I love that. You wanted to take Cousins and assume that no one would take a QB and Geno would come back. And we got Michael Mayer and both of our QBs went. Fantastic stuff.
On a serious note for a moment, beyond week 1, I mean, you've talked glowingly about how this system is going to work for Kyle Pitts, how it's going to work for Drake London.
Yeah.
Darnell Mooney, when he's gotten decent quarterback play, has been actually pretty good. And it's a question of like, how healthy is he legitimately going to be compared to what he was in his peak season with the Bears? And by healthy, I just mean as these guys even get a little bit older, you lose a tiny bit of athleticism and suddenly you don't separate from other NFL players, right? It's not that you have an injury. It's just that the margins that these guys are dealing with from a health perspective are so small. But then you think about the coordinator, you think about the dome. Other than simply that he didn't play at the end of last season and that there is some kind of scuttlebutt about how he handled his surgery and rehab that people are less comfortable with. From a projection standpoint, from the way that it works in fantasy scoring standpoint, should there be a gap between Tua, Jared Goff, and then where we get someone like Kirk Cousins?
No, I think that's. I mean, I have Kirk Cousins right behind them. It's Tua, Goff, Cousins in my rankings, and no tier breaks or anything. I think those are all great points. And I was just looking ahead at his schedule. When you made that note, I liked that. I put Cousins into the queue, but I had other names in the queue. So if I just would have gotten to the top of the queue, it would have been great. But I liked that, even though I liked Geno's option in week 1. And I kind of suspected somebody would take a second QB after I was talking about Geno, especially as a possibility. But you could still get through week 1 with Cousins. And then I was looking at his other games. He's at Philly in week 2. He's got KC at home in week 3. The Philly game, it shows a game total of 48.5, high scoring game on the road, but like should be a fun one. KC at home, like he's going to have to throw a bunch, right? That's going to be a shootout in a dome on Sunday Night Football in week 3. That seems like a really fun game. I'm excited for that one. I didn't realize that existed, but Kansas City at Atlanta is our Sunday Night Football game in week 3. Yeah, I was looking at those week 2 and 3 games and going, yeah, I mean, I get Sean's point. I like Geno for week 1, but Cousins would be the great play in week 2 and week 3, even if we don't play him in week 1. And yeah, I mean, as far as the way that you talked through the long-term stuff, he's a really nice option. I took a lot of him in best ball early on. He's one of those guys I took a ton of early on and then was like, God, I'm getting too much of this guy who's coming back from an Achilles and pulled back. And then I think I'm like more, sometimes you pull back too far, but it was your initial inclination and you're like, I'm drafting him every time. It's always Atlanta stacks right now. And then you pull back too far and you're like, oh, I didn't even actually have that strong of a position. But yeah, I agree with everything you said. We are back up. I threw a ton of quarterbacks in the queue in case that happens again. We'll get a quarterback this time. There's like 8 quarterbacks in the queue. At the top of all those names is Aaron Rodgers. And we do have the Garrett Wilson play. He's at San Francisco on Monday night. If nothing else, Sean, if we're on the chopping block, it would be nice on Monday night to have this stack and see what happens. If everyone else doesn't really perform, we got to get a Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson, big Monday night game.
Yeah, no promises, but we might even have to stream the end of that if it's 17-18. We need more points from those guys to avoid the chop. I'm okay there. I'm okay with Watson, who has an interesting week 1.
Oh, yeah. He's at home against the Cowboys. We could do that, too. Are we going to run out of time again? Oh, we ran out of time again.
I was
Well,
going to
at
ask
least
if you
I
were
put-
helping,
put all the
your
quarterbacks in the queue.
subscriber get to their thing, but we do still have half an hour until that
We do.
deadline.
I suggested it would take closer to 90 minutes. We timed out again. We got Aaron Rodgers. So Garrett Wilson, Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, James Cook, Aaron Jones, Tajay Spears, Hollywood Brown, Jonathan Brooks, Cole Kmet, Juwan Johnson, Tyler Conklin, Michael Mayer, Aaron Rodgers. That's the team so far. But both timeouts, you've suggested a different thing than I was thinking late, and I've been like, oh, I want to check on that. So last time I clicked to go check on Cousins' schedule. This time I checked. You said Watson has a good game, and so I clicked over to see who it is. He's playing the Cowboys, and I was like, oh, yeah, that's going to be a good game. And click back, and we had timed out. So I lost track of the clock in clicking off of that page both times, which is not on you. It's on me to check the clock, but it's led to some decisions we definitely were intending to make, which is Michael Mayer and Aaron Rodgers.
Well, it does set up in a very fun way, though, for Monday Night Football, because if you have your quarterback and your first round pick haven't played, you're going to be in 18th. I mean, especially when you also don't have a great tight end score. I mean, we're gonna be in 18th place.
Yep.
With our quarterback and our first round pick heading to play the San Francisco 49ers, who at times have a very good defense.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We might need 20. We might need 40. We're going to be chasing some number of points from the other 17 people, unless we get a monster Cooper Kupp game or a monster T. Higgins game or a monster Aaron Jones game.
I'm actively rooting against those things.
What'd you say?
I said I'm actively rooting against those things. Not really, because I need other teams to score well in week 1. But yeah, I want us to be trailing and need that fourth quarter touchdown.
I love that. I think that is a blast. We have one more pick to make. Is it a quarterback? Is it an auto pick? Is it another tight end? What do you think we should do here?
I just like the fact that we have timed out 100% more often today than in our 3 teams at once drafts.
And you managed all of those, and I managed this. Having said that, I'm also managing crossing off the list, so it's a little bit of a different game here. I'm kind of the mule that keeps the list going in the background, and so then you got to also navigate the room. I hope you're enjoying yourself over here. My back's getting real.
I'm not doing anything.
Tired.
I'm not doing anything.
I've been carrying you this whole draft. It's getting real tired over here.
I'm both angry at and impressed by Lewis Oil here. Out of the 15 spot, they took our 2 favorite quarterbacks during this draft. That's a tempting play for me in high stakes, Ben, is to take Jaden Daniels and then be like, you probably also want another risky rookie quarterback. That's who I come back with in round 18, round 20, what have you. Bo Nix with Jaden Daniels. We're not going to be able to get that. That was the one we kind of wanted.
Yeah.
In the last round.
That would have been my suggestion for sure. I'm sitting here laughing because I looked over to Twitter and one of my old CBS guys tweeted me drafting Kyle Pitts once again. And it's that video. I don't know if probably half the audience hasn't seen it, but there's like a sheep that's caught in like a little ditch that was cut out. And the video starts with this kid helping him out, pulls him out, and he runs off. And then he jumps super high right back into the ditch and gets stuck again. And it's a great tweet. That's what it feels like diving back in on Pitts. Shawn, I did a main event last night with Jacob Sanderson. Buddy of mine has his own Substack, Thinking About Thinking. We streamed that on the Stealing Signals channel. We got Kyle Pitts at 407 on a build that started Bijan, Trey McBride, Jalen Waddle. We got Pitts in the 4th. And we wound up getting some really good receiver depth after that. It's a really good team. It's one of my favorites that came together. The draft came together really nicely. Sometimes you get those opportunities.
I think anybody who's seen the videos is like, that would be a really good team if you had a different 4th round pick.
If you didn't have Kyle Pitts jumping into ditches. We are almost back on the clock. 3 picks away. Deshaun Watson does go. Bo Nix went. Drake May went as an upside quarterback. Stash might start early. We are 2 picks away. I got the pick for us. I've cleared the queue out. I've left one name in the queue.
Okay.
What do you think?
Pull this up. Let's see what you got here.
Yep.
I was thinking it was either that name or tight end 5.
Or tight end 5. That would have been another one I would have been perfectly comfortable with. But is that Tucker Kraft? We're 1 pick away. Who would tight end 5 be for you at this point? Will Dissly might have an interesting role for the Chargers in week 1.
Well, I was going to say that I really want I don't think it's going to be big in week 1, so I don't want to set that expectation, but I'm excited to see what Jatavian Sanders does. He was the pick at 1205. So yeah. That isn't an option for this particular team.
Yeah, he went a little while back before we autoed Michael Mayer. I was keeping an eye on him as well. Yeah, we are on deck here. And now up. Tim Patrick goes there. Do you want to take the quarterback or do you have a tight end you like?
No, let's take the QB.
So we're going to snap up Justin Fields, who you mentioned. We're not going to start in week 1, but I mean, if Russell Wilson bombs out enough, that's one of those picks that you make and you go, okay, well, I can see how that could actually be worth keeping and not cutting in week 2 and week 3. If somehow Justin Fields wound up getting the start in week 2 or week 3, and we may keep him through the first couple chops, who knows, and just see, depending on how bad Russell Wilson looks in those things, see if he winds up playing, because pretty quickly he can be a high scorer, right? Like he can be a guy that you're like, oh, we don't even need to bet on a QB. Justin Fields is a top 10 option at this point because he's running so much, the way they used him in the preseason. So yeah, I'm just going to toot our horn a little bit more. I think we found the 14th round pick that actually has the ability to be a pretty huge piece of the puzzle in this for a while. Like you said, that second quarter of the season when I think we're talking about like Jonathan Brooks or something, but week 3 or week 4 or something to that effect, if he starts, we maybe don't have to acquire a quarterback. Maybe from there until week 8 or week 9 later on, he's our guy for a bit. By that point, week 8 or 9, if you get there, I mean, we're not going to get through week 1, but if we get there, you have the option of adding some really high upside quarterbacks, probably relatively cheap, I think, down the stretch. That's the thing that starts to get plentiful, I think, is top 10 quarterbacks, top 15 quarterback options are going to be, I mean, people might be rostering multiple of them. I don't know, but it's going to get thinner and thinner. And eventually there's like 5 teams and like, there's enough quarterbacks to go around at that point, the really good ones. So you'd be able to add a Joe Burrow or something like that. We start, Sean, week 1. We're going to go with Aaron Rodgers. We're going to go with Garrett Wilson, Cooper Kupp and T. Higgins, James Cook, Aaron Jones, and Tyjae Spears. And one of our 4 tight ends. I don't know if we know yet. Probably not Tyler Conklin unless we really want to go in on the Jets. Probably not Michael Mayer. Probably Cole Kmet. But maybe I'll convince you that Juwan Johnson is the play. He's been banged up in August. Probably Cole Kmet, I think. This is going to be a fun team. This was a really fun stream. What do you think about how we did?
Yeah, I like it a lot. It came together very well. You get the first 6 round picks are fantastic for the format. Again, we were very fortunate. The 9th hole, I think, is perfect for this, this format, this draft. We were able to manage the runs there. The 3 wide receiver followed by the 3 running back gives you very good starters through the 2 flex positions. Then being able to get some volume at tight end, assuming we can survive week 1, I think we'll be able to manage that. We have the 2 stashes in Hollywood Brown and Jonathan Brooks, who would be going much, much earlier, probably in rounds, say 3 and 4, I'm going to say, if they were healthy. And then we have players that we're not going to be, and this is going to be true of everybody in the league, but when you look through how you're going to manage that first free agent period, we'll be able to cut 2 of the 4 tight ends in all likelihood. We'll also be able to cut Aaron Rodgers if Justin Fields comes in.
Yeah.
right, and late in week one. But we'll also be able to cut Justin Fields if Russell Wilson out of nowhere has a big game, right? So we have flexibility. We have enough guys that we can cut and make the moves we need to make. I think it's structured nicely for early season, for that sort of week 4 to week 6 area, and it lets us pursue multiple paths with our free agent attack going forward. What are you thinking about how the way this draft played out from a big picture perspective? How does it fit with the tactics that you've laid out in your strategy piece? And is there any sort of evolution of your thinking about the strategy piece now that we've done this with 18 good participants?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I'm glad that we went 3 receivers early. I talked about wanting to get in on an early tight end, and it worries me in an 8-team starting lineup to have a real question mark at tight end. I think that can be the reason you get an early chop pretty quick. I mean, that's where you can differentiate, right? And so I think if I have a question of did we do it right, did we do it wrong, there's some debate to me about the 2-3 picks and whether we should have gone tight end, Kincaid at 2 over Cup, maybe Kittle or Bowers at 3 over Higgins. I do like the Higgins pick there because Kittle and Bowers, I think, are a little bit lower down in terms of consistency and reliability, but getting somebody like a Kincaid or a Kelsey or an Andrews that you feel like is going to have a lot of volume, is going to be a key part of their passing game, I think is worth a second round pick when I look at the way that we had to try to address tight end. And I still don't even know, what our projected points are going to be like at tight end. I do like what we did at quarterback a lot, and for the reasons that you said, and we can cut either of them and how it'll progress. It would have been a little better if we would have got Cousins instead of Michael Mayer in 12 because of the auto pick. But that idea of late round quarterback, which was one of the big tactics that I wrote about, as you mentioned, my piece, that was something I thought was vital to this format. I don't think it's like this room pushed quarterback. Even in an 18-team draft, nobody took a quarterback until the middle of the 4th round. There was only 2 in the 4th. There was a big run finally in the 6th, and everybody had already kind of gotten through some of their flex spots at that point. And I think that makes some sense to also look for some QB upside, but QB is still going to be the most replaceable position when you think about how you avoid a floor outcome. I mean, it's the flex spots, it's the tight end position, it's the places where somebody else is going to have a floor score, but we're not going to necessarily, as long as Rodgers doesn't get hurt, like he's going to be able to throw for enough yards and probably a couple touchdowns to at least put up 15 points or 17 or 18 points. And some of these elite quarterbacks, they have higher ceilings. That's what makes them so, palatable in the earlier rounds. But some of them are also going to score in the 15 to 17 to 18 point range too, because that's the way the quarterback works. And so that's how you can get eliminated, is when your early quarterback scores the same as all the late quarterbacks. Or at least that's the way that I'm thinking through it. Again, would have been nice if we had a Geno or a Cousins. Rodgers is a little bit of a riskier week 1 play, I'd say, but I thought that would have been a safer and a more comfortable play if, say, we got Geno, for example.
Well, and as you kind of mentioned that round 6 is not necessarily that strong. And so if you have one of your top 6 round players taken out with a QB, then it's the similar type of thing to the situation with the tight end, where, I mean, you're entering week 1 really down sort of a half spot from a projection standpoint.
Right.
I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that actually avoiding both of the onesie positions allows us to be so much stronger at the 2 flex positions that we would kind of have to get unlucky with those. And anybody who gets actually chopped in week 1 it's going to be the unluckiest participant. Yeah. Right. But I think that we've skewed it a little bit in our favor from that perspective.
Yeah. I think that is something, Shawn, through the years at Stealing Bananas, that's been a key part of a lot of the different things we've talked about, is this idea of winning the flex, this idea of depth, this idea of people focus too much on their starting lineup. They don't focus enough on, like when you address the onesies early, you fill your starting lineup early. They don't focus enough on the depth through to that flex spot. And it is a good point. All those drafters who took a QB in the 6th, I said they started to get into their flex spots, but not really, especially the ones who took a tight end as well early. They had, in many cases, their 2 running backs and their 2 receivers, but no flexes yet. And then they had to come back after that QB pick in round 7 and 8 and hit flex picks that can't compete. Like our last flex is Tyjae Spears. That some of those teams I'm looking at have trickier flex spots. I'm not going to call anyone out necessarily, but that does get a little bit challenging. And I think pushing QB was something that, as far as what we did, I think we did right. And I like what we did. And then, like you said, the decisions we made once we had our week 1 starting lineup done, we're going to stash Hollywood Brown. We're going to stash Jonathan Brooks. We're going to do all this crazy 4 tight end thing, which just gives us the cut flexibility. Like you said, we're thinking through, what are we actually going to want to do after week 1? We're going to want to cut guys, right? We're going to want to be making decisions and shuffling things. There's going to be players that were not drafted here that are going to be interesting, because that's how it is in every fantasy league, that we're always looking at week 1 waivers, even when there's not a team that's cut. And so there's even small waiver bids that we will be interested in after week 1. There's going to be a lot of information. And so I think that certainly the second half of our draft and everything from round 7 on was thinking through the way our season plays out. And you and I were on the same page on that with the Hollywood, the Jonathan Brooks picks, and then everything we did from that point forward. I think that's really defensible, and I like the way that we built that stuff out.
And you mentioned those $1 bids. I strongly encourage people who are fired up to play this format and are going to take it pretty seriously to, get those, say, $2 and $3 bids in on a lot of players, because it's very tempting to think, and in some cases it will be true, but in some cases it won't be true. But it's tempting to think that there are 18 teams. This guy is valuable. Somebody is going to bid. I don't need to. And then the people who actually put in the $2 and $3 bids on those guys who are lower down, they get them and they don't lose a lot of their budget.
That's right. Shawn, this was a blast. Anybody wants to play Guillotine League of their own, go to guillotineleagues.com. I mean, I can just show you. These are the rules. These are your teams. Create private league up here at the top. Enter your league. Proceed to league creation. You just get a link that you can share. I'm happy to help anyone who wants to fill out a league. If you want to fill out a league in the Stealing Signals Discord, perhaps. This is a fun format. It's definitely something that we suggest giving a try. I had a blast with it in 2022 when we did it the first time, Shawn, and I'm gonna certainly have a blast with it again this year. Got several leagues this time. Gonna see, we're gonna build some real strategies, see some things. We might do some more leagues in season, like you said. It's a fun format, and it is something that I want to do more of in the future.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you're in a variety. I'm going to be in a variety. It's easy to think you have something figured out, but if you don't actually play and then you don't experiment, certainly as you are learning about leagues for the first time, don't take the safest path. Experiment with some contrarian types of tactics. Even if you lose, and in many cases when you do things that are contrarian, you will lose, you learn a lot. And you want to get that feedback. It'll make you better at Guillotine Leagues. It will make you better as an overall fantasy drafter. Ben, that's what we're looking for, is constant growth.
That's right. Love the way you said that. Appreciate you guys. Stream. Like the stream. Subscribe to the channel. All that good stuff. This was a blast. Definitely think you guys should give Guillotine Leagues a try. We will be back at some point. Don't really know the schedule right now. If you don't hear from us again after week 1, Sunday night, we will be recording a response podcast. Everything we saw in week 1. We always love to do that. Pretty good chance it will be live right here on this channel. Get your notifications set up. We haven't decided on that entirely yet. But yeah, this has been Stealing Bananas on Stealing Signals. Later, guys.